Welcome back. Well, leaders in the House and Senate reaching a bipartisan agreement yesterday on top-line spending for the remainder of 2024. They're hoping to avoid a government shutdown later this month. We've got two major deadlines coming up. The deal setting the government's discretionary spending at a max level of $1.59 trillion. That includes nearly $900 billion for defense spending and $700 billion for non-defense spending. It also cuts IRS funding and COVID-19 spending. That, of course, has not been spent. That extra money that has not been spent goes away. The House Freedom Caucus slamming the deal on X, saying, don't believe the spin. Once you break through typical Washington math, the true total programmatic spending level is $1.658 trillion, not $1.59 trillion. This is a total failure. Joining me right now is North Carolina Congressman Greg Murphy, a member of the House Ways and Means Committee and the co-chairman of the GOP Doctors Caucus. Congressman, thanks very much for being here.
Good morning,
How do you
Maria.
read this agreement? What do you think this number is? Is it 1.59 or 1.68?
I think it's 1.59. Maria, you know, we elect our leaders to lead. And we got rid of one of our members with Kevin McCarthy. The Freedom Caucus did, or members thereof. And now we have Mike Johnson. Mike is a very, very competent and very, very good conservative. And if you don't let your leaders lead, then you end up in chaos. And so it just gets to be the point now where how much can you just say no and remain to be credible? If you say no, 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 and everything's a failure and you're against everything, you lose credibility. We have to let our leaders lead. And if you look at the long term, if you look at the real big picture here, Maria, this 15% of spending is really not going to move the needle. Until we reform mandatory spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those are the things that are going to reform spending. Fighting over these 15% of things just to make take your basketball and go home because you don't get everything you want, loses your credibility and then really doesn't help the cause. We end up with more bipartisan bills that way than anything else.
Well, I think you make a great point, but I guess what the critics are pointing out is this side deal that was made between Kevin McCarthy and President Biden that would have allowed $70 billion in accounting moves to be used to achieve the cuts required by that cap. Yeah. So that's what Chip Roy and other conservatives are talking about. They're saying, look, by allowing this $70 billion in a side deal to stand, you're pretty much putting an effective cap higher than what you're selling. It's not 1.59, it's 1.66 trillion.
Yeah, Maria, it's probably somewhere in the middle. Again, if all you do is say no to everything, we're not accomplishing anything. You know, and some of these guys have gone on media and say Republicans haven't done anything. It's because of this type of nonsense where you say no, no, no to everything. We have to let our leaders lead. It's not perfect. We can't get to perfect, but it's the best thing we have moving forward if we're going to make real changes in our debt.
Well, I want to ask you about the Homeland Security spending and what happens there, because I spoke with Stephen Miller over the weekend on Sunday Morning Futures, and he said the real important date is February 2nd. That's the critical date in terms of whether or not we're going to see a government shutdown, because that includes spending on the homeland. Your reaction to these critical deadlines and whether or not you're going to meet them?
I think we will. I hope we will. Let's just put it that way. You know, crashing the government, as a few of some of the folks in the chaos room have said, we're going to shut the government down, take our ball and go home, helps nobody. It helps us turn into the minority, which then again, all these things that we've done or partially or hopefully mostly accomplished go out the window. And so, yes, I hope these deadlines are met. We can't not fund Homeland Security. Good God, we have an invasion at our border, which is going to lead to an impeachment, we hope. But God, you know, you just can't stop all this stuff just because it isn't perfect and you don't get all your way.
Yeah. Liz Peek, jump in here.
Well, Congressman, I appreciate the idea that the Republicans in Congress want to look like they are governing and not just being obstructionist. On the other hand, we have a spending crisis in this country, and I think voters are going to demand at some point that they take a firmer stance. We know the Democrats won't do it. Here we had this gigantic explosion of spending around the COVID crisis, and we've just kept right on at that level of spending, and that's inappropriate. So at some point, there has to be a real steely approach to this, and when is that going to happen? If not, when the White House really wants something, what they really want is Ukraine and Israeli funding. this is an opportunity to really hold their feet to the fire, yes?
Sure. I agree with you completely. But again, I'm going to go back to where real spending occurs. This 15% of our total budget is going to move the needle very, very lightly. The fact now that we add 10,000 Americans to the Social Security and Medicare rolls are the true cause of where our debt is going out of control. Sure, with all the inflation that Biden caused by flooding the economy with money, and then the subsequent rise in interest rates has made our debt cost more. Absolutely, but those aren't going to go away overnight. The true reform is going to be in our mandatory spending. These small cuts and these fights and taking your ball and going home because you don't get 100% does not help the overall picture of controlling our debt.
Well, you make a great point. The debt now $34 trillion, but you've got other issues that you need to tackle this week, this month, the rest of the year. You've said, as your colleagues have, that the border being secure is your number one priority. More than 300,000 border encounters last month. A small bipartisan group of senators and the White House now negotiating a deal, we're told, to strengthen border security. Can you tell us anything about this?
Well, I think what we need to do is obviously what's happened, we have an invasion. We have an executive office mandated invasion of our southern border. We have hundreds of people caught on the terrorist list. We don't even know who the rest of them are. What we're trying to do is get tougher parole laws, which the Biden administration does not want. They want to basically catch and release and let everybody go in the country. It's been a very firm Republican stance, and I think finally the Biden administration is realizing we're not going to move on this, is the fact that we can't just let these people go into the country without some type of pulling them back, and hopefully, and for the vast majority, especially these Chinese nationals, kicking them right back out of the country. They don't need to be here.
Yeah, Chinese nationals encountered up more than 1,000% year over year. They must be being directed by somebody to come to America. But really quick, Congressman, on the other business at hand, you've got an impeachment of Mayorkas potentially happening, an impeachment of Biden potentially in this inquiry, and, of course, all of the news around Hunter Biden. What's the priority there?
The priority there is obviously the President of the United States, Joe Biden. I think, yes, we have to get rid of Mayorkas. Is he the big one orchestrating the whole border thing, or is it somebody in the Biden administration? That'll remain to be seen. We have to get control of our country, and that means Joe Biden first.
All right, Congressman, good to see you. We will follow it all. Thanks very much for joining us, Congressman Greg Murphy, this morning.